Lucian often roamed the bustling downtown streets during daylight hours, drawing double takes from every passerby who recognized the faint, otherworldly pallor of his skin. A vampire who could stroll beneath the sun was unheard of until recent years, yet there he stood, wearing an elegantly tailored suit and a genuine smile. As the busy city traffic surged around him, everyone he encountered seemed to pause in disbelief, caught between curiosity and lingering fears about beings who lived far longer than any human. The store owners, street food vendors, and children on their way home from school all watched him with a mixture of awe and apprehension. In a city rife with tensions between humans and immortals, Lucian's daily presence was at once a beacon of hope and a reminder of a precarious peace. That peace had come only a decade before, after countless covert skirmishes and uneasy negotiations. Vampires, werewolves, and other hidden communities inhabited the edges of urban life, and humanity had spent centuries trying to pretend they didn't exist, or labeling them monsters when denial became impossible. The official revelation that immortals lived among them had triggered an outpouring of both fascination and dread. Laws were drafted to regulate interactions, treaties were forged to maintain a semblance of harmony, and countless pledges were made on both sides to prevent bloodshed. Through these turbulent times, Lucian emerged from the shadows. He possessed an almost diplomatic composure and proved himself willing to talk. Actually talk to fearful citizens. People realized he wasn't a phantom menace, but a plausible friend. Little by little, curiosity and empathy began to replace unnamed terror. In the central square stood a tall billboard emblazoned with Lucian's face. It displayed his striking features: high cheekbones, a faint smirk, and the notion of timelessness in his gaze. The words, "A Future of Harmony," in bold letters, formed a rallying cry for his mayoral campaign. Onlookers swarmed around the base of the billboard, taking photographs or simply staring. If anyone had doubted his intentions, his message was plastered for the entire city to see. Lucian was running for mayor. He wanted to unify humans and immortals alike. Word spread quickly, and citywide discussions ignited overnight. Could a vampire, especially one who defied traditional law by traversing the daylight, truly represent the interests of the living and the undead alike? Those steeped in politics regarded him first with ridicule, then with increasing wariness. His rival candidates scorned the idea of an immortal leading the people, claiming he was a public relations trick. On the other hand, a larger and larger crowd of citizens couldn't help but be intrigued. An undercurrent of fascination washed over the populace. If Lucian could walk in the sun, what else might he be capable of? The day-walking vampire had both admirers who saw him as the perfect bridge between worlds and detractors who warned his existence was proof of dangerous powers unknown. Every radio program, newspaper column, and late-night talk show was abuzz with theories, conspiracies, and interviews, all revolving around one question. Would it be insane or brilliant to elect a vampire mayor? Lucian's main campaign office was perched in an old Victorian building, shadowed by gargoyles perched along the roof's edge after decades hidden from mortal society. Chunks of the city's architecture stood as a testament to secret alliances between vampires and craftsmen who had built safe havens with hidden rooms and secure passageways. Lucian had chosen the location precisely for its symbolic history. He stood there one morning, leaning over a table scattered with campaign brochures and flyers. The staff around him, some mortal, some not, were eager to plan out the day's event. They'd scheduled a midday press conference to address the city's concerns, from overcrowded streets to the lingering distrust between humans and immortals. Lucian, always conscious of bridging divides, had meticulously crafted policies to benefit all citizens. Night school programs for vampire children who required an alternate schedule, specific health services for werewolves dealing with monthly transformations, and state-funded initiatives aimed at breaking age-old prejudices. Although his staff was committed to the cause, tension still emerged. Heather, a sharp-eyed human volunteer, nervously sipped her coffee and looked at the vampire strategist across the table. There were still moments she found inconsistency in how the immortals handled certain issues, and suspected they didn't entirely trust her. She had seen the seedy underbelly of the city's vampire enclaves, where unscrupulous immortals fed on unsuspecting humans. Meanwhile, Vincent, the strategist who had lived nearly a century, wondered if the humans on the team would betray Lucien's campaign the moment a more normal option arose. Both pinned their hopes on Lucien's lead. He was, in their eyes, not just a candidate, but a mediator, always trying to dispel suspicion in both camps. At the noon press conference, Lucien climbed onto a makeshift stage. Facing him was an imposing crowd of reporters, residents, and curious onlookers. The sun was strong, yet he stood unfazed, his understated confidence eliciting hushed awe. The unfair stereotypes about vampires had never fully faded, even with official treaties and daily coexistence. But Lucien projected a sincerity that undercut many anxieties. He began by recounting his upbringing, a time of hidden corridors, candlelit lessons on how to remain unseen when the sun shone overhead, and mentors who whispered that humans could never coexist with beings like him. Then he told his story of transformation, the series of research breakthroughs and magical anomalies that allowed him to walk in daylight. As he spoke, he pledged to institutionalize transparency, transform cooperation between humans and immortals, and address every real worry, from affordable housing to nighttime safety. Applause rippled through the audience, though scattered jeers indicated doubts remained. When questions were opened to the floor, a flurry of voices sprang up. One older gentleman asked if Lucien would enact any legislation curbing vampire feeding practices. Another individual questioned whether, with immortals in positions of power, humans would be marginalized to second-class status in their own city. Lucien responded with calm confidence. He promised regulation that protected human lives without demonizing immortal customs, and he insisted that the path to communal prosperity lay not in pitting one group against the other, but in forging alliances. Such statements struck some as lofty idealism, but for many, the first seeds of faith were sown. Eventually, the gathering dispersed, leaving behind enthusiastic supporters and a small, vocal group of skeptics, all energized to speak about the vampire's platform. In the following weeks, Lucien's campaign unveiled a series of public initiatives designed to ease the friction between mortal and immortal communities. Night markets, once viewed with nervous suspicion by the human population, found new life under official sponsorship. Illuminated by ornate lanterns, these markets welcomed families with children who marveled at curious magical displays beneath the moon. Food stalls were established to cater to both human and vampire diets, complete with specialized beverages that substituted for fresh blood. Meanwhile, an even older tradition was revived, monthly community gatherings meant to bridge divides. These events showcased art from both cultures, along with carefully supervised areas where immortals could feed safely but discreetly, and humans could learn about immortal lifestyle. The gatherings, once shrouded in underground rumor, were now out in the open. Skeptics wondered if that transparency helped or simply fanned the flames of unease. But either way, the city was forced to confront the reality that humans and immortals lived alongside each other. The tension beneath the city's surface, however, did not simply vanish. Anti-immortal sentiment remained, a vestige of centuries-old fear. In hidden corners, rumors flew about rogue vampire clans who sought to control local politics from behind the scenes. They viewed Lucien's articulation of unity as a betrayal of their inherent superiority. He was, in their eyes, diluting vampire culture by proposing legislation that would mingle them too closely with humans. A clandestine faction sprang up, circulating pamphlets propagating that the rightful future of the city was a vampire hegemony. They painted Lucien as a nouveau idealist, or worse, a traitor to his own kind. Nor did the humans lack their own extreme voices. Some citizens argued that, for all his charismatic speeches, Lucian remained a predator who had fed on human blood, even if he claimed to do so consensually and under safe guidelines. They questioned whether centuries of tradition and a supernatural hunger could be subdued by a few laws and a bright smile. One outspoken congregation of protesters took to the streets, carrying signs that proclaimed "Humans Only, Mayor." They marched by City Hall, chanting their disapproval. Despite the mostly peaceful demonstration, sporadic violence ensued when a few masked individuals vandalized a local vampire-owned shop. Fights broke out in an alley that night, culminating in several injuries. This incident ignited citywide debates on the delicate line between protest and outright bigotry, forcing Lucian to intervene with a calm but firm public statement urging restraint and dialogue. In the midst of this fragile landscape, Lucian's campaign staff worked tirelessly, organizing town halls in various neighborhoods, some predominantly human, others largely immortal. In these intimate sessions, attendees shared anxieties, frustrations, and hopes. Lucian listened intently. The stories he heard were diverse. A human mother worried about her teenage daughter, befriending a vampire with questionable feeding habits. A centuries-old werewolf who recounted persecution in earlier times. A clan of younger vampires feeling left behind by a political system that didn't recognize their existence until recently. Each tale peeled back another layer of the city's collective unease. Lucian assured them he had lived through hidden centuries himself, seen friendships torn apart by prejudice, and believed unity was neither unattainable nor unnatural. Something poignant flickered in people's eyes whenever he addressed them. Whether they were fans or skeptics, they sensed he was genuinely hearing them. His greatest challenge came in the form of a televised debate against the most prominent human candidate, Councilman Gregory Crane, a seasoned politician wary of immorality in government. The debate arena was a bustling auditorium, its seats filled with fervent supporters from both camps. As cameras flashed, tension crackled in the air. Councilman Crane opened with sharp accusations, suggesting that electing an immortal would be irresponsibly handing the city keys to a centuries-old hunter. He hammered Lucian on safety. Could he guarantee that rogue vampire groups wouldn't be emboldened by his leadership? And what about the city's growing concerns that their next mayor might favor immortals over humans? Lucian responded calmly, cutting through the heated rhetoric with directness. He highlighted detailed plans, citing collaborations with law enforcement agencies, both human and otherworldly, to ensure public safety. He reminded Crane that ignoring the immortal community had historically driven them underground, breeding more dangerous secrecy. By openly involving them in civic life, he claimed, the city would strengthen both accountability and cooperation. Moreover, he emphasized that immortality did not diminish a sense of responsibility. If anything, living for so long taught one to treasure the rare relationships and harmony that can be formed. The auditorium swelled with applause, yet the debate remained fierce. Crane had a firm base of supporters, many concerned about the unknown aspects of immortal society. They wouldn't be swayed easily. As election day crept nearer, the city's walls and bulletin boards teemed with campaign posters. Lucian's emblem, a stylized sunrise behind a crescent moon, became a familiar sight in tea houses, labs, shopping plazas, and corners of the city inhabited by those who rarely ventured into daylight. Social media poured out endorsements and criticisms alike. Some posted selfies wearing t-shirts, emblazoned with Lucian's face, proudly proclaiming he bridges worlds. Others lambasted him in long rants, asserting that no matter how charming he appeared, he was still inhuman. Polls leading up to the final vote were uncertain, shifting drastically from day to day. Lucian's staff stockpiled coffee and synthetic blood substitutes as they toiled into the wee hours, crafting last-minute appeals that hammered home the message of coexistence. Beneath all the fervor, Lucian found himself in moments of quiet self-reflection. Late one night, he wandered through a secluded park where carefully curated rose bushes and night-blooming flowers stood luminous under streetlights. He recalled bygone centuries when he'd hidden in catacombs, risking a stake to the heart if any mortal discovered him. Back then, the idea of running for public office was nothing short of absurd. Now, that memory served as both inspiration and caution. He had reached a pinnacle. If he could win this election, he might forever alter how humans and immortals interacted, not just in this city, but perhaps beyond. If he failed, he risked confirming the worst fears of each side, setting back the fragile progress by decades. He passed under a flickering lamppost, each footstep stirring leaves across the path, pondering that enormous responsibility and the uncertain path ahead. Finally, Election Day arrived. The air crackled with anticipation. Polling centres opened at dawn, lines forming with bleary-eyed citizens waiting to cast ballots. Although the city had never witnessed such a contentious race, the turnout was extraordinary, with humans and immortals alike determined to influence the course of history. Reports surfaced of werewolves arriving at station doors in the early morning after finishing their nocturnal transformations, standing beside human commuters in line. Vampires, long unregistered or disinclined to engage in mortal politics, trickled into the booths, determined to have their say. The tension was palpable as campaign volunteers from both sides offered assistance, maybe a sugar-laced pastry at the side of a table or a small chat about the weather to break the nervous energy. All day, the city's mood teetered between anxious excitement and cautious dread. The local news ran live coverage, filming lines of voters that stretched around city blocks. Interviews with passers-by revealed a tapestry of opinions. Some voiced unwavering support for Lucien, proclaiming that for the first time they felt hopeful about bridging centuries of mistrust. Others admitted that, despite the novelty of a vampire candidate, they believed a tried-and-true human politician, like Councilman Crane, was the safer choice. Children pointed at the cameras excitedly. Clearly, folks reminisced about the days before the Great Revelation, confessing they never thought they'd see a creature of law stand front and center in a race for mayor. When the sun dipped below the skyline, polling stations slowly closed. The city's entire population held its breath as giant screens set up in the central square displayed early returns. As the numbers began to trickle in, the tension grew, coiling around every conversation. Councilman Crane took an early lead. Then, as more votes from the outskirts poured in, Lucien began to overtake him. Time seemed to crawl. Anxiety buzzed through the streets. A sudden hush enveloped the crowd when the final tallies appeared on the big screens. Lucien was ahead, albeit by an infuriatingly slender margin. Those in the square erupted into jubilant cheers, while some hung their heads in disbelief or disappointment. But the presence of victory was undeniable. A day-walking vampire had just become mayor. Lucien's acceptance speech took place on the very stage where he had launched his campaign. The crowd illuminated the darkening sky with flashing phones and cameras. Some faces glowed with unbridled hope, others with guarded skepticism. But nearly everyone listened intently. Lucien spoke gently, his voice resonating through the amplified speakers. He thanked every citizen who stepped up to vote, whether for him or his rivals, emphasizing that the city's future would hinge on collective effort, not just the will of one leader. He made a solemn pledge to champion policies that ensured mutual respect and benefit, from designated feeding zones that demanded transparency to new educational programs that tackled prejudice at its roots. His voice caught when he talked about how, as a child in a hidden haven of vampires, he'd never imagined vampires and humans could attend the same schools, eat at the same restaurants, or stand side by side in lines at the polls. Now, that future appeared more tangible than ever. In the weeks that followed, Lucien assumed his role at the helm of City Hall. His staff, still composed of humans and immortals, settled into a rigorous schedule of meetings with department heads, community leaders, and local business owners. They addressed issues that ranged from the mundane, like potholes on main streets, to the extraordinary, like providing safe spaces for vampire feeding and werewolf transformation. Progress was neither instant nor without setbacks. There were still flare-ups of anti-mortal sentiment, and certain immortal clans stubbornly refused to recognize any interference from a human political system. Yet Lucian navigated each challenge with measured poise, urging both sides to meet as often as possible. One evening, he convened an unprecedented summit in the Grand Hall of City Hall, inviting the city's most influential human figures and leading representatives from every known immortal faction. The old columns were draped in neutral banners, signifying unity. By candlelight as well as modern LED fixtures, they gathered to discuss a shared future. Tensions ran high. At times, participants raised voices or exchanged barbed comments. Yet Lucian's presence anchored the discussion. He deftly shifted the focus to mutual goals: safety, economic prosperity, cultural enrichment. Slowly, the arguments cooled. Over the hours, with midnight approaching, real resolutions began emerging. Painstakingly, compromises were drafted. Fair feedings, cross-cultural events, anti-discrimination laws, and improved channels for conflict resolution. The summit concluded in the early morning hours with a silent but electric sense that something extraordinary had just happened. News reporters the next day called it a landmark moment. Photos splashed across the front pages showed Lucian in the center, handshake extended, toward a cautious but earnest group of humans, vampires, and other immortals. Skeptics remained. Perhaps they always would. But there was a widespread feeling that this meeting had altered the course of the city's destiny. Even Councilman Crane, now the head of the city council, resigned himself to grudgingly concede that Lucian was making strides many had deemed impossible. If he can keep the peace, Crane quipped to a reporter, maybe it won't matter that he's got fangs. Though the path forward was fraught with difficulty, it seemed the city had found a mayor who genuinely believed in the potential of every living and unliving soul. People began to speak with pride about their hometown, which had unshackled itself from the illusions of isolation and fear, choosing instead to embrace radical coexistence. Schoolchildren marveled at how nightmares and legends could become partners in community service. Immortal families stepped out of hidden enclaves, filling the night markets with new flavors and artistic expressions. Side by side, humans and immortals started to tackle problems such as homelessness, environmental sustainability, and education for a generation that might finally grow up without the old ghosts of hatred. The city, once perched on the brink of a cultural rupture, had begun to weave new threads of understanding. And Lucian carried on, walking the city streets by day and night, greeting every resident with a nod or a wave. Most people understood the magnitude of his personal journey. A creature born in darkness, transformed by a singular miracle, and molding himself into a leader who stepped beyond law. His mere presence broke barriers. Flanked by curious groups of children who stared up at him with both wonder and respect, he would kneel down, grin, and say, differences aren't meant to tear us apart. The crowd applauded him not for standing in the light, but for standing by them, bridging that ancient divide with an unwavering hand. Only time would tell whether the fragile peace would hold indefinitely. Skeptics might remain, extremist elements might still lurk, and the complexities of bridging lifespans measured in centuries with those measured in decades were yet to be fully navigated. But the first step had been taken, and it was bold. Under Lucian's leadership, hope glimmered in every moonlit alley and sunlit plaza. Once overshadowed by fear, the city had chosen a future that promised to honor all its inhabitants, human, immortal, or otherwise. And in that choice, even for just a moment, the people felt they could set aside their trepidations and stand together, forging a unity that might one day be as enduring as the oldest vampire's life.